geologist. He was initially involved as a polling and counting agent and eventually become a trainer for the agents as well. Mr. Ng is one of Tindak Malaysia's founder members and has been leading a team of more than 20 volunteers working on constituency delimitation using methodology developed in-house. Mr. Ng will speak on predetermining an election through delimitation and what the 13th general election results could have been with a new seat configuration. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ng.
Ladies and gentlemen, the ground which I plan to travel over has always been trampled by the few speakers in front of me, ahead of me, so I will have to modify what I say as I go along. So you will bear with me, it's a bit disjointed, but there are still a certain number of ideas which I'd like to throw at you and which I hope will set you thinking. This title that I have before me was not my original idea, but it has been modified so many times that I am not quite sure what I will be speaking on. But anyway, I prepared a series of slides which will guide me through, and when these areas have been covered, I will just skip over them. Now the question which I would like to ask before I start is, if the seats were fairly drawn, would Pakatan Rakyat have won GE13? Now let's look at this slide here. Now for those of you who may not be familiar, or especially a foreigner, what the GE13 results would be like. You can have it at a look in this chart here. The popular vote won by the BN is only 47.38%, whereas Pakatan Rakyat had won 50.87%. But the number of seats won by BN is 59.9%, whereas Pakatan Rakyat won only 40% of the seats. Now, in any part of the world, when you win 60% of a seat in an election, that would have been a landslide. So now the question I put before you is this. Who won the election? Who won the election? Did BN win the election? Can I see a show of hands that BN won the elections? So, 1, 2. Okay, who think that Pakatan Rakyat won the election? Okay, I see a majority think that Pakatan Rakyat won the election. Now let us look at what we mean by winning an election. An election is a process in which you put to vote a certain issue or certain popularity or, whom you want to choose to be elected. Now in that sense, Pakatan Rakyat won the election because they had more votes in the popular vote than Barisan Nasional. So the question is, who won that government? Now there's an illusion in this country that if you won the election, you will form the government. Now that is the illusion we have in this country. The truth is, it is completely different. You can win the election, you can win the general election, you will never form the government except Barisan Nasional. Now, if you think that what I'm saying is not correct, let's have a look at the next chart that I have here. Now, at the top of the blue line there is the line that shows the number of seats over the years. From 1964 onwards, on the left-hand side, and then towards the right, 2013, the latest one. So that shows the increases in the seats. Just ignore that line for the time being, and then look at the next 3 lines below. The next one is the black line. That is the number of seats in terms of percentage won by Barisan Nasional. And then you look at the line, the red line right at the bottom. That is the popular vote. That means the total votes counted over the whole country that has been won by Barisan Nasional. Now you'll find that the red line is always below and the red and blue line is always above. Now that has been explained this morning why this is the case, so I will not go in again. So if you understand that, maybe you may not, the mechanism of how this operated may not be explained to you. Let me try to explain very briefly so that you can be completely clear why the first past the post is not a good system in this particular aspect. And that is this: if we had a lot of marbles, blue marbles and red marbles, but there are slightly more blue marbles than red marbles. Now, if we take a sample of these marbles, if they are all randomly mixed, and then we take them, and then we find that we always have more blue marbles and red marbles in our sample. Now you imagine now that the whole country is this collection of blue marbles and red marbles, and the constituencies that you have are samples of these blue marbles. So if you divided all this big mass of blue and red marbles into little lots of different sizes, you will tend to find more blue marbles than red marbles. Now, on that basis, that all the blue marbles will predominate in every sample you have, or every portion of it. And that is the reason why there is this effect, this magnification effect in an election, in first past the post, that if you have a majority in the voters overall, then in every constituency you have a better chance of winning. And that is why Barisan Nasional, in the past, when they had more voters voting for them, win their elections, in the sense of getting more seats in parliament. So now the question is this: if it were to fall below that, let's look at now the next back to that graph we are talking about. Now, you will notice that most of the time, the vote for Barisan Nasional in terms of popular vote is about 50 to more than 60%. It's always the average. But the number of seats they get is very much higher. It goes up even to 90%. So that is explained, has always been explained by this phenomenon of being magnified. The number of candidates you get in a member of parliament, in the parliament will always be higher than the percentage of votes they get overall. Then came along in 2008, and you find that now the votes obtained by Barisan Nasional has dropped down to about just slightly above 50%. And they still get a very much higher votes. In fact, in any part of the world, they would have been called a landslide, despite the fact that it's just a marginally higher number of votes. So I began to look at it and I said, this is something wrong here. So I started looking into the data and so on, the voting and the constituencies and so on. And I said, there must be something else more to it. And that's not apportionment. Now, you have all heard about it this morning. I will not go through that again. I have all these slides that we have all seen. This is the first slide I came up with in this hearing that we had, the parliamentary select hearing in Kota Kinabalu. I presented this. And I think most of you will have seen this. But this trend you will see goes in state by state. In every state you see the same pattern being repeated. So on the first one, on the left, you see all these red lines. There's one by Pakatan Raya. And then the blue line, the BN, is on the left. And then you go to the next one on the right, Johor. All the blue lines. And the red line, the single solitary red line there, is on the right hand side. So, and it goes on from state to state. This pattern is repeated. Now, there's no random chance to this. It is just designed by the Election Commission. So, the whole point I want to make is malapportionment is the main reason why we have this discrepancy. Because if this magnification were to work, then it should work both ways. Now, in the last election, Pakatan Raya won more votes in general, the overall votes, than Barisan Nasional. Yet Barisan Nasional had more seats than Pakatan Raya. Why? So it is not because of this magnification factor. It is simply because of malapportionment. So I think everybody now, I think, without me having to say it, by the previous speakers, we all know that malapportionment is the main factor behind it. Now I'm not saying the magnification factor doesn't work. It does work, and it did work, but only that we did not see the result in the last election. You did not see it because it was hidden. I shall show you the reason why, and you should see why afterwards. Now the consequence of this malapportionment is this: we shall always have Barisan Nasional government. No matter how you vote, maybe you go up to 65% of the votes for Pakatan Raya, there will still be a Barisan Nasional government if this system is allowed to continue. That is my main message to you. If I could get down from the stage now, I would have said what I wanted to say today. So if you look at this, what I've done here is I've added all the votes for Barisan Nasional in the seats they won and plotted them from the smaller seats to the bigger seats. And here you can see at the point of intersection of 50% of the that is this line here, this red line here, 50% of all the seats in Parliament, you find that they only need 15.4% of the total votes cast in 2008 to form the government. In other words, the rest of the voters do not count at all. All Barisan Nasional have to do is just to take care of this 15.4% of voters in this country. They will be able to form the government. And this can go on. And with each delimitation exercise, they can strengthen the position despite the eroding numbers they get in terms of the voters who will vote for them. And that is a fact we have to live with. So what are my conclusions for this part of my talk is that malapportion is why BN gets far more MPs than justified by its popular vote. And the general elections will not bring about a change in government. And all this stuff about Ubah or whatever else is just nothing more than a war cry for your own self, for your own self-confidence. You're not going to make any change if this system continues. So let us now look at how this came about. Now, I understand Dr. Lim will be talking about tomorrow the history about election system in this country, and I will not go too much into it, except to highlight a few points here. And these are some of the important dates. The first general elections we had in this country was in 1959, Malaya. Okay, I'm talking about Malaya, means West Malaysia. Malaysia was formed in 1963 with the amalgamation of Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore, and then after that, Singapore broke off. So, before then, there was Malaya. And the constitution we have today had been based on the Malayan constitution. Now what happened in 1959 was, there was an election after independence in 1957. So that was just first general elections. And that, for the purpose of that election, the constituencies were drawn based on the census that was taken in 1952. In the 7 years that intervened between 52 and 59, there has been a lot of migration of the population. There's been a lot of migration of the population from the rural areas to the urban areas because of job opportunities that came up after the war. And there was another big factor. There was a communist insurgency we had in Malaya. So what the British did was to round up all those rural folks and put them in new villages. That's why you get places like Sedang, for instance, it's a new village. Now it's part of Kuala Lumpur. So there are a lot of these new villages, like in Ipoh area, that have now become the town areas. So what happened was, all this rounding up of these Chinese rural folks and put them in new villages is to protect them from the communists and to prevent the supply line. Because, out of fear or sympathy, the Chinese community had to feed the communist insurgents. So the British thought that this would be a good idea, and it worked. So anyway, there was a lot of migration, and the election in 1959 was based on the population distribution defined by the census in 1952. So because of these 7 years of in between, a lot of changes in there's a lot of movement in the population. So when the election was held, they had to change, they had to actually amend the constitution from 100 seats that is supposed to be for the whole country at that time to 104, because when they carried out the delimitation like what we did without the help of all the computers and all the software, they ended up with 104 seats. And it would be quite impossible to go back and change it again to 100, because it would be a long, tedious exercise. So, when the election was held, with the first parliament, the EC chairman of the day, and that's an interesting part that comes up, the EC chairman of the day. Now, there was a constitution amendment that says that, you look at the next one, it's in Article 46(1), the original text is the House of Representatives shall consist of 100 elected members. Except that the first House of Representatives, which is the one held in the first election, shall consist of 104. That's what I've been talking about. And then, after the clause, and then it says, after completion of the first census to be taken after Merdeka Day, Parliament may by law alter the number of members of the House of Representatives. That means, if you have taken a new census, then you can change the number of MPs. Now, the first chairman of the Election Commission was a man of great stature and great integrity. And that is, I think this is a man that we should all take our hats off in respect. And that is Dato Haji Mustafa Al-Bakri Haji Hassan. Now, he's no mere government servant like what we have in the EC now. He was a man of great stature. Now, look at his accomplishment before he became the chairman of the Election Commission. He was the chief minister of Perak. He was the keeper of the ruler's seal, the secretary of the conference of rulers, and so on and so on. And before he became the first chairman of the Election Commission. And he was also a member of the delegation who went to London to negotiate for independence. And that he is. I've circled his face there as this group of politicians got off from the plane. On his right, the tall Indian gentleman is Tun Sambantan, the first president of MIC, I believe. And to his right was Tun Razak. So all this, he was not a normal civil servant. He was the chairman of the Election Commission. Now, you look at the past, his history, that he left UMNO. Why did he leave UMNO? Because he didn't believe that UMNO was doing writing. He didn't want to open the doors to the non-Malays, so he left. Then he joined Parti Negara. And he find that the opposite, these guys who are the non-Malays, they don't want to became anti-Malay, so he left. But being the chairman of the Election Commission in his time was very different from all the successes that came along. It was the intention of the writers of the Constitution that the member of the Election Commission shall not be removed from office except on like grounds and the like manner as a judge of the federal court. That means he is supposed to be independent. Now, what happened was they changed it. In 1960, after the first election, as EC chairman, he tabled before Parliament the division of the constituencies. And he wanted to be brought back to hundreds. Then after the new census, then you can decide whatever you want. But according to the Constitution, and which is abiding by, because he's a man of high moral principle and great courage, I must say, he tabled this, and UMNO said, no, there's no way we're going to do it. Because if you were to reduce from 104 to 100 seats in Parliament, all these seats will have to come from UMNO, because in the rural areas, they find that the seats, the population there have been overestimated because of the migration, so population growth. So, if this were to be detrimental to UMNO, UMNO would reject it. But he insisted. So what did UMNO do? They have to change the Constitution twice to try to remove him, each time unsuccessfully. Now, there was Article 114 that says that notwithstanding anything in Clause 3, blah, 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 he cannot be removed unless he are guilty of these offences. And that is, he engages in any paid office of employment outside the duties of his office. Now, what happened is this. He had, in his earlier days, before he became the EC chairman, invested money in some company or companies, I'm not sure. But he had been getting money from his investments of his. So he had side income, so to speak. And they wanted to remove him on this ground. Now, he fought back with another sub-article in this article itself. And this 1146. It said that the remuneration and other terms of a member of the Election Commission shall not be altered to his disadvantage after his appointment. So he has been appointed. Now you can't change him because now he's getting money from somewhere else. And he had always been getting this money, even before he became the EC chairman. So on that ground, he won. Now 2 years later, UMNO tried again. And this time, they used the atom bomb on him. He changed the constitution again, and this time he says that I'm not quite sure exactly what it is because you know this legal jargon hard to follow, but what exactly happened was described by Sophie Rajani in his book. Now he says another amendment in 1962 made the 1960 amendments retrospective. That means anything that applied then would be dated backwards. But the more important thing that anything that saved this man would now be ineffective. And that's what it says the last time. They would have effective notwithstanding anything in clause 114, bracket 6. And that was the clause that Al-Bakri used to dismiss the charge against him. So now they removed this one. Now, he was pretty smart about it. He knew what was going on. So he divested all his interests. So by the time this came into effect, I'm not getting any more income from anyone else except what I have here. So that is how he escaped that. So what happened now is this. After that, they gave up on him, so left him alone, but they started trimming all the powers of the EC. And that's why today we have the emasculated election commission. Now, if you think that election commission is an independent body, independent of the government, you are making a very fundamental mistake. If you are asking for the removal of the chairman because he did this or he didn't do that, you are barking up the wrong tree. You are like a bull charging at the cape instead of the matador. You should be charging at the bullfighter himself. And that is, I think, where we should think our strategy. You shouldn't be asking for the EC chairman to go because he goes and the next one comes in and he's another civil servant and he has to obey his boss. Yes, the EC is no more independent. So now let's look and see what happens. One of the first things that happened, also back in 1962, and is the commission is no more responsible for making, no more deciding how the constitution should be drawn up. Instead, it has been watered down to making recommendations for the delimitation of constituencies. In other words, the EC chairman may be a great guy, maybe someone like me, go out there and say, you should do this, and they say, we don't need you. And this is what the fact is. The EC chairman is powerless to do what you want him to do. Not because he's a man of no principle, but because he's a man that is suitable for the job under the Barisan National Government. So be aware of what you're directing your fire at. In fact, the EC is now a department in the Prime Minister's office. Now what this means is this, the Prime Minister is the chief of the Election Commission. You are barking at his assistant. So redirect your aim. And along with that, the Constitution has been changed over and over again. You have the 13th schedule introduced. Now, just now one of the speakers said that we should refer to the 13th schedule as a basis of our delimitation. No. That is part of the scheme, the emasculation of the Constitution that we have. If you want to follow that, you are going wrong to the wrong path. So now what happened is this. The delineation process is quite straightforward, as already been explained earlier. The EC will make a proposal to the Prime Minister's office. The proposal, it is non-binding. The Prime Minister can look at it and say, okay, go ahead, or take it back, change it, or ignore it altogether and then go to Parliament after making his own changes. So the EC chief is no more the EC chairman, but the Prime Minister himself. So who should you be asking to be removed from the Election Commission? So my point is this: if you want to analyze the problem, you must know where the problem is, what the problem is. Yes, if you do not know, you come up with the wrong solution for the right problem. It's not going to work. It's just like, you know, you've been diagnosed for headache and say, I'm going to take an aspirin and come back and see me if you don't drive in 2 days' time. So this is what we have to do. Look at what the problem is and then solve it. Not giving a solution to a problem that's not going to accept or not appropriate. Now, on top of that, there was another constitution change. Also around that time, the number of voters in each constituency shall divide by no more than 15% from the average. If we allow this, and this has been deleted, and this was in our original constitution. So in fact, our constitution has been changed so many times that I really have to state here. And according, this is done by Faruqi or Faruqi, I don't know what his name is, how to pronounce his name. This is a gentleman who is a lecturer in Mara University. And he's recorded as 42 times and 650 changes. Now, when we look at the number of changes we have in the Constitution graphically, this is what I have. There are 182 articles in our Constitution. And all those that have been unchanged, I've colored in light blue, and those that have been changed are colored in yellow. You can see that more than 75% of our articles in the Constitution have been changed. And then on top of that, there are all these squares or rectangles on the side. And these are the schedules that have been added in after the original Constitution. So in fact, our Constitution today is a far cry or has little resemblance to the Constitution that we had when we got independence. And why were all these changes? And you can see that all these changes came for the convenience of UMNO. So that it's just like an elephant in the room, that anything furniture in the way, move it away. And this is what's happening. So now UMNO has free reign of the government. And there's nothing within the law that we can do about it. There's seriously nothing that we can do about it. You can have election after election, but you are not going to get a new government. You can have any election result you want so long as the end forms the government. So why are we here today? Well, one of the main things I come here personally, if not for Tindak Malaysia or anything else, is I want to get my message out to the public that this is a situation you face as citizens in this country. That we have no control, we have no choice of the form of government or the government you have. Because, like Ford says, you can have any color you want so long as it's black. And you can have any government you want so long as it's partisan national. And that is the fact here you have to face. Now, why is it important that constituencies can be defined? Now, what is delimitation? Okay, I'm supposed to talk about this. I've been asked to squeeze this into my talk. And that is to talk about delimitation and the process of delimitation, because I was the one heading the team of people doing the charts and so on that we had. That delimitation or delineation means the same thing in this context. It's the act of defining the boundaries of the constituencies. Now, why is it important? Now, constituencies, as you can see, will define the outcome of the election. You have seen this many times. I don't have to argue about it. I think the other speakers should convince you. If they don't convince you, there's no point for me to talk about it anymore. In Tindak Malaysia, we have several objectives in undertaking the delimitation exercise. And the first was to produce this constituency maps that you see outside and in the booklet that you can get as you go out. And with this, we have the first, how shall we say, the first line of defense. In the past, the EC have come up with their own maps and asked for another hearing and say, okay, who objected? And there were some people who objected. I think the opposition went and objected to it and said, okay, show me an alternative. Nobody had any map to show. Therefore, your objection is overruled. So now, as a first stop, we came out with all these maps from every state in this country. And if the election commission were to hold a hearing tomorrow, we have all these maps to say, look, we like to object. Now what we don't have is that 100 volunteers from each constituency. And this is the next effort that Tindak Malaysia wants to undertake together with us. Now, of course, the other idea here is to raise public awareness of the issue through education and participation. And that's why we like to get more and more volunteers to come and help us. We have done the maps, but the more people who come in, the more we become familiar with what is going on, understand what the situation is. So that when you discuss this, you discuss it intelligently, not based on false understanding of what's going on. So that is what we want to do. Now, so we need public participation in this, and we are therefore doing a recruitment drive. Now, I have been told to very briefly talk about the process itself, and I hesitate simply because it is not something that I can talk in a few minutes, not even the whole half hour or even 1 hour on this. Because when we train somebody to do it, we set with him or her for the whole morning, for the whole afternoon. With computers, all the things that are necessary. The constituency maps, the state maps, and the software that goes along with it. So I shall skip this part. But coming back to what I have said earlier, the question I first asked, or does ask as the title of this paper, who do you think won the elections? Now, we went through all this exercise of doing the delimitation, and then we tried to make the constituencies within the range of 10% of the election, the electoral quota. That is, the quota will be explained in more detail afterwards, but what it means is the mean number of voters per constituency within each state. What would the result be like if we had the election based on fair constituencies? The result came out just last night, after we had got our new constituencies, what we proposed, and we stick in the 2013 election based on the distribution of votes between Barisan Nasional and Pakatan Rakyat in each of the, what I call that, the election wards. See, what will happen is, now we have a constituency, and say, okay, we will carve out a new constituency based on the equal number of voters, or more or less there. And then we have a new constituency. So all these wards will be shifted to the new constituency and see what the results will be like. Now, we did that. Now, we assume that all these voters would vote the same way in terms of party, either for PN or for Pakatan Rakyat. And what would the result be? I'll skip all these slides, which I'm not going to talk about. This is the result. We would have today, if we had fair constituencies, Pakatan Rakyat government out there. But as I say, because of the situation we have in this country, we are never going to see that day. Not ever. Thank you.